You are listening to the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, where it's all about education, support, and coaching for adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Zena, a late diagnosed ADHDer, here to help you unpack the challenges, frustrations, and the positive side of living with ADHD. With my no BS approach, I'll help you to better understand your unique ADHD brain and how you can work with it to feel better, increase your self-confidence, improve your relationships, and ultimately achieve your goals. Hello, my beautiful ADHDers. We have got such a treat today. We are about to hear a interview or a conversation really that I had with my friend Vince Ford. And Vince and I, we both met at Toastmasters and we do quite a bit of speaking together, and I look up to him as an absolute expert in speaking, creating connection, telling stories. And that's why I wanted him to come on, because he has actually helped me to understand myself and others so much through stories that he has shared and, parts of the brain that he's helped me to understand. He's helped me hugely, and he demonstrates it so well in this conversation that we have, the power of story and, how to create connection with others. So let me tell you a little bit about Vince. So Vince Ford has been a jackaroo. He's worked in the salt mines and he's led four-wheel drive trips through the sand dunes of the UAE and the mountains of Oman. He's also an award-winning author with 16 novels for children and teens. His most rewarding role has been a stay-at-home dad, learning and growing alongside his daughter as his wife pursued her career. And he has recently found his calling whilst writing and speaking around the theme of human connection. And that is what we're talking about today, which for me, as somebody with ADHD who has struggled to, maintain friendships over the years, I found this conversation so helpful and so fascinating. So I am really hoping, actually knowing that you will too. Enjoy, my friends. Hey everybody, welcome back to Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, where today we have a very special guest. We are joined by my friend Vince Ford, and I invited Vince on the podcast today because he is very neuroaffirming, but not just that, because Vince and I have been friends, I want to say, maybe a couple of years now. I think we met in Toastmasters, so in the public speaking arena. And Vince has given a lot of talks and speeches that I have had the privilege of listening to, and I have learned so much from him. And I've learned a lot about the brain, about how my brain works, about how other people's brains work. And it has been so helpful. So I've chosen to share that with you all today. He is a wealth of knowledge, so many incredible stories. He's going to hook you straight away. So welcome to the podcast, Vince.
Thanks, Zena. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. Tell me, do you remember when we first met? Was it at Toastmasters? I think it was.
I'm pretty sure it would have been at Kickstart Toastmasters. Yeah. One of our early morning meetings.
Yeah. And then we actually I had the privilege of sharing the stage with you at the Tell Me Tauranga event, which was really cool.
It was a lot of fun, and that was quite cool because we both ended up being coached together, and it was kind of a coaching group. We were helping each other get prepared and improve and hone our speeches down a little bit. So I really enjoyed that experience. It was nice, great to work with Zena.
Yeah. And it was really nice, I think, because that helped us to kind of understand each other a little bit more and get to know each other too, which was really cool. So it's awesome to have you here. So I thought that we would kick this off with, and for anyone who's watching the video, the dog turned up in the background. I love this. Anything could happen.
Yeah.
I thought we would kick this off by talking a little bit about connection and belonging, which is, so much of the work that you do in the world and also so many of the conversations that we've had when we've caught up. So we could start anywhere, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose people might want to know a little bit about me. So
that's a good idea.
My background is as an author for kids and young adults. I've
Mm-hmm.
done a few other things, but I've got 17 or so novels for children and young adults. And that was what I was doing. I did some work in video prior to that. We did some traveling. I was a stay-at-home dad. We lived in the Emirates and Qatar, and I spent a lot of time out in the desert driving four-wheel drives when I wasn't looking after my daughter. So we've had a bit of fun, done some different things. But I got back from overseas and we built a house, this one behind us. I was
Mm-hmm.
project manager, so I was on site every day for a couple of years and running wires and digging holes and painting and decorating and everything else I could do. And it was great. And I got on great with the tradies and would have lunch with them, and it was all action and I had a great time. And then they finished, and Ondi, my wife, went to work, and my daughter went to school, and it was just me and the dog. All the builders had gone. And I sat down to start writing kids' books again. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear to sit alone in my head without that connection that I'd had. It wasn't what I wanted to do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that sparked a real interest in social connection and human connection. So for the last few years, I've been doing a lot of reading, doing a lot of research, and really looking into human connection, what it's about, where to find it, how we do it these days. And a lot of what I've talked with Zena about has come from that. I'm currently working on a book around social connection. And a lot of it relates back to story, actually, which we'll come to later.
Mm. It's so funny because total ADHD moment, I completely forgot to ask you to introduce yourself. But as you're telling your story, and I've thought this before, I'm like, I swear he could have ADHD. Maybe, I don't know. But so many of the things that you talk about and so much of your life experience, I think is so relatable to our community, which is so cool. So tell me, like, you've shared with us how you've got to this place of, learning more about social connection and writing this book. What are some of the things that you've learned on this journey?
Well, probably the big one to me is that we're all social creatures. Social is huge for all of us. And I reckon that connection it creates energy. And it's kind
Mm,
of like a petrol engine. You put petrol and air together and you get that spark of ignition and bang, you've got
mm,
energy. And I reckon two people in the room together and you get that spark, bang, you walk away with a sparkle in your eye and a spring in your step and maybe even a fire in your belly.
mm,
It's something that provides energy. And we're all social creatures. Professor Matt Lieberman did some work and he looked at the social and the non-social parts of the brain. And he used fMRI scans and you could see what was going on when you're thinking non-socially. Say you're doing a visual problem or you're doing some accountancy or you're doing some maths. So
yeah.
there's works that fire if you're doing that. But then if you're thinking about yourself and other people and the relationship between the two, there's another network that fires. And he found out that your default setting is social. So if you've
Mm,
got 2 seconds between visual problems, your brain immediately switches to the social network. So we
mm-hmm,
spend most of our lives with the social network operating. So by the time you're 10 years old, even if that was only 20%, and it's going to be
mm-hmm,
far more than that, you would have spent 10,000 hours thinking socially by the time you're 10. And think how much more you're comfortable and how much more you know socially now. It's a huge amount of our lives, and a lot of it is subconscious. So you don't really notice it. He did another really interesting experiment, and this is one that I love. He had people again in fMRI scans, and he would put a couple of people in, and they ended up playing an online game. It's kind of like a game of catch, so catching and passing a ball. But they'd
mm-hmm,
have three people in the group, catch, pass, and then they'd leave one of those people out. So it was a setup. So one
mm,
other person would be rejected from the group, and they had an fMRI scan at the time, and he was examining those scans in his lab. And right next door to that lab, there was another experiment going on with pain, people in physical pain. And the scans of their brains happened to be sitting next to the computer that he was working on, and a nearby computer. And he glanced over and he looked back and he couldn't tell the difference between the brain scans of people with social rejection and the brain
mm,
scans of people in physical pain because it
mm,
uses exactly the same networks. So when you say you're heartbroken,
mm.
it physically
Physical.
hurts.
Mm,
It's the same networks that are associated. So yeah, when you're rejected, when you're feeling socially isolated, it's like you're in pain. And it's very much like you're in pain, far more than we previously thought. And I think the really cool thing to come out of that research was that he found that there is a cure for social pain. And interestingly, it's the same cure that you use for physical pain. You know, Panadol or Tylenol in the States can actually have an impact on social pain. So if you're
Wow.
broken and you want to, lie at home with a box of tissues, watching The Notebook and drinking a bottle of wine, you might be better off just taking a couple of Panadol and then watching The Notebook, and you might not need the tissues or the wine either.
That's interesting because we know that people with ADHD often struggle with something called RSD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And that means that we can experience like intense feelings of pain when we are in a situation where we've been rejected or criticized, or we anticipate we could be. And now what I hear you saying is that is physical pain. Like the studies show that that is physical pain. It's not just, an emotional, mental thing. It's actual physical in the body. It's the same.
Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
uses the same networks. It might
Yeah.
feel slightly different, but it's that same feeling. It hurts.
Yeah.
And rejection hurts for anyone. And it was interesting when you said when you think you might be in a position where you're rejected, and
Yeah.
that's the mentalizing part of things. So mentalizing is the ability to see something through someone else's eyes. So if I had that ball that I've been bouncing around and I
Yeah.
left it here and I walked away, and then while I'm away, my wife cleans up and moves the ball and puts it somewhere else. And I came back again. And if I was to ask Zena, where does you think I think the ball is?
So you would think it's where it was when you left, right?
Yeah, well, if I said, where do you think I think? Yeah,
Yeah. So
exactly.
you
You
would,
think
because you'd
I
left
think
the
it's where it
room.
was? Yeah,
Yeah, but I know
yeah,
it's not. I know it's moved,
yeah.
right?
So
Yeah.
that's the mentalizing ability, and it begins when you're about 4 or 5. So a 4-year-old will probably say the ball is where it is, because they haven't got the ability to see through someone else's eyes. Whereas maybe a 6-year-old will say, "Oh, well, he thinks it's where it was, but it's not where it is now. But that's where he thinks it is." But there's actually a really good joke to think about mentalizing,
Yeah.
multi-level mentalizing. You think what someone else is thinking, what someone else is thinking. So there's a customer at a barbershop getting a haircut, and a
Hmm.
kid walks in, and the barber says, "Hey, check this kid out. He's the dumbest kid in the world. Here, I'll show you." So he goes over to the till and he gets a $5 note and a couple of $1 coins out.
Yeah.
And he holds them out and says, "Kid, which one do you want, the $5 or the $1 coins?" So the kid walks up, takes the two $1 coins and walks out again. And the barber says to his customer, "Say, dumbest kid in the world." And the customer thinks, "Oh, yeah." He walks out of the shop later on and sees the kid eating an ice cream. And he says, "Hey, kid, why did you take the two $1 coins instead of the $5? Kid looks around and he says, "The day I take the $5 notes, the last day we ever play that game."
So true.
Yeah. So it's multi-level. And
Yeah.
you go up to about 5 levels of mentalizing
But it's the
because
ability to think about what other people are thinking about. And I remember when you told me this, because I said to you, that makes so much sense with our teenager. Like we have one of the boys has just turned 13, and he is obsessed with what other people think. Like he is just, that's how his brain is, like wired right now, is just, I've got to wear what's cool. I've got to do what's cool. And he doesn't have the ability, or at least this is my perception of it, is like he can't think, well, their opinion doesn't matter. Like it's what you think that matters. Like it's just so tangled up. And I remember
yeah.
hearing you tell me that, and I was like, oh, maybe he can't
Yeah, well
think
that's
like that.
so they looked at another experiment, and they looked at teenagers. Well, if I asked you, Zena, what
Yeah.
you think of yourself, okay, the mentalizing part of your brain doesn't activate because that's what other people think of you. If I
Yeah.
ask what other people think of you, yes, your mentalizing part of your brain activates. If I
Mm.
ask a teenager what other people think of them, mentalizing part of the brain activates. If I ask them what they think of themselves, the mentalizing part of the brain still activates because they haven't got a sense of self, and their sense of self is relying on the feedback they're getting from the people around them. So it's not firmly fixed. So their sense of who they are is actually what other people think of them. That's why it's so important. And I see it in my teenage daughter as well. What she hasn't got that real sense, and she's starting to develop it now. She's 18 now, and she's starting to change a little bit. But before that's developed, anywhere up to 18, it could go into your 20s.
Yeah.
You're reliant on what other people think. And that's why it can be so painful if a teacher tells you, maybe you've done an art project and a teacher looks at it and says, oh, you'll never be an artist. That actually forms a part of your image of yourself. Teachers, parents, your friends, if they tell you something negative, that can actually become a part of your sense. And that's, I think, that relates way back to a whole lot of people that suffer trauma from their childhood, particularly for parents. Someone in a parent situation puts someone down and fails to see them for who they are and for the goodness that they've got, then that can linger and that can lead to trauma for a very, very long time.
And that also, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, like, from the ADHD lens, how, there's research that shows we've had 20,000 more negative messages by the age of 10 than, a neurotypical person, somebody without ADHD. Yeah. And so I think, as you're saying that, what I'm hearing is, like, we haven't yet developed that sense of self. So those messages are, they're kind of like wired into us. We develop that sense of self and our ability to separate ourselves from that later. But by that stage, like,
it's internalized.
That's kind of internalized. So that's so much more difficult to separate, because that ability to have that sense of self doesn't come until later. And I even wonder, like, with the ADHD brain, it's possible it could be even, delayed a little bit further for us, possibly. But that makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And just how baked in it becomes, I don't know, and how much work you need to do to undo that kind of, whether it's programming, I don't know what you'd like to call it, but it's a really interesting one.
I remember when we caught up recently, I asked you about that and how we could, because that's something we can use against ourselves, right? When we think about, what other people might be thinking, or, we can really spiral.
Yeah, the stories you tell. So someone say, my wife's at a conference, and I try and ring her and she doesn't answer the phone. I try and ring her again. She doesn't answer the phone. Ring her again, doesn't answer the phone. I think, oh my God, before she left, I never told her, that I loved her. I never told her how good she was looking. Oh my God, something's going on at the conference. She's having an affair. I'm gonna have to move out. The house is gonna split up. We're gonna have to get an apartment in town. The dog's too old to take two. His hip's sore. I'm on my way to take the dog to the vet to get him put down. It's the story we start to tell each other. And it's like my wife texts and says, oh, my phone was flat. Sorry, I didn't get back to you. Love you heaps. See you later. It's the story we tell ourselves. And Brene Brown talks about that, the story that's going on in your head. And sometimes it's about mentalizing, and it's just about slowing down and saying, well, actually, what's happened, it can get out of control. And that can be tough too sometimes.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said to me, like, one of the pieces of advice that you had was to say, and I find this really helpful, say, the story I'm telling myself is, right? Like, it's the ability to, like, separate yourself from the story that is spiraling out of control. And the demonstration you gave was great. I was like, are you inside my brain? Because that's what I can do very easily, right?
Yeah.
But it's, being able to say, hang on, the story I'm telling myself is, and it just creates...
someone's feels like they're being really cold to you today. Your partner comes home and they're not really listening to you, and it's like, oh, what have I done to offend you? And it could be something that's going on in their work. It could be something that's going on somewhere else with one of the kids. It's something that they're worried about, but the story I'm telling myself is this. And then I, no, that's not about that at all. This is what's going on. This is what I'm thinking, because we're very good at thinking what someone else is thinking.
Yeah. I'll often talk about this, and I've got an episode on this. What am I making it mean? Like, that's what I will try and identify, right? The facts of the situation are, my partner has read the text message and not replied. I'm making it mean, I've done something wrong, or he doesn't care, or he's busy having an affair, or like all of these things. But again, that's the same concept, right? Like, the story I'm telling myself is this.
And text messages are beautiful because there's no context in it. You can't see the expression on their face. You can't see the emotion that's going on. You can't see that they're distracted. You're missing that whole body language, the expression. You're missing so much. It's just a line, and it's so easy to attribute meaning to that where there is none.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. As you said that, like I was thinking, those of us with ADHD, we take on more information through our five senses. So when we are, staring at a screen, reading a text message or the lack of a text message, that is just, that's just that visual, communication. But when we're in person with someone, and like you say, we can read the body language and we can take on all the other information that's going, we can, interpret a different picture. So, yeah, that's just so interesting to think about, like how we have such limited information and yet we can create such a big scene and such a big story from that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the way we communicate often now, social media, texts, emails, when you haven't got that full range of expression, it's very
Mm.
easy to get it wrong.
Yeah, it is so easy to get it wrong. Yeah. Interesting. Tell me, one of the things you told me about was that Chicago study of strangers on the train. Was it on the
Yeah,
train?
Nicholas Epley.
Yeah.
It's called Mistakenly Seeking Solitude. So
Mm-hmm.
he got a bunch of students to ride on trains and buses in Chicago, and Chicago's not famously a very friendly city. And he got them to go up and just to talk to strangers on their bus journey or on their train journey. And the students were pretty reluctant to do it initially. They thought, God, I'm going to get myself beaten up. But they did do it. And they ran a survey afterwards asking the students, but also asking the people they interacted with about how they enjoyed their bus journey or what they got out of their bus journey.
Mm.
And without any deviance, they found that those people that related and had a conversation with someone on the train had a more enjoyable trip than those that didn't.
Mm.
So the students and the people that they approached. And we naturally, and actually I heard there was an interview on national radio on the weekend about someone saying a very similar thing, that we actually are afraid that people are going to reject us. We don't think people want to talk to us. And the reality is people enjoy connection, people enjoy conversation. And the more you can practice doing that, the less fear of rejection that you feel. So if you're able just to say wave to someone in a supermarket, say hi, talk to the checkout person, talk to the person that's picking apples up at the same time as you are, and just have a small interaction, the more that builds on itself and you don't feel the fear so much. So it becomes so
Mm.
much easier to talk to people. So it's just
Mm.
building up that habit, building up that practice, because we naturally think, oh, no, they're not going to want to hear from us. You discount yourself and you discount how much someone else wants to deal with you. And in fact, it actually improves both of your lives. I reckon it's that energy thing again. You're getting two
Mm.
things together, you get that spark of connection, and you walk
Mm.
away with energy, and it makes both of your lives better.
Mm. Yeah, there's something about that connection that can be so powerful. It reminds me of this one time I was out running, it was a while ago now, and I was, on the last kilometer coming home, and I was just struggling. And I just wanted to give up. I was like, I just want to walk. I'm done. I've had enough. This sucks. And I saw this woman, and she was just coming out of her driveway, and she gave me the biggest smile, and she said, "You go, girl." Like, and just that little bit of connection. I swear I've never run so fast. I was like, yeah, I got this. Like, watch me get
Yeah.
home. Like, it just, like that little bit of connection, I was just so grateful for it. And I have never forgotten that because it meant so much to me in that moment. And yeah, I think that really speaks to what you're saying. Mm.
Yeah, and I think it goes right back to the caveman days, to prehistoric times when humans were living in groups, and like you needed to be in a group, in a band,
Mm.
to be able to raise your children, to be able to fight off predators, to be able to build shelter. And we're designed to do that. And we've been in those tight groups for so long. It's only in the last few hundred years, maybe 500 years, that we're starting to build up these massive complex societies where
Mm.
there's so much interaction going on. And in some ways, that's blocking us off from those close interactions that you have every day, just chatting to people, just connecting with people. And I think we're built and we're designed to run off those connections. They're a huge part of life, and that's something that's being neglected to an extent today. And I think that probably leads into the things that I was talking to you about the way that we connect these days.
Yeah, before you go there too, I was just thinking about the belonging element, because I think when we are so afraid of being rejected, we remove the ability to belong in any situation, right? Whether it's just connecting with a stranger on a train, or, in a group of people, you know, when we're so afraid of that being rejected part, we miss out on the connection, we miss out on the belonging. But in actual fact, as you were saying, like, the more we just say hi and how's your day, and, like, just have that little interaction, the more we show ourselves, we like gather evidence in the process. Actually, I can do that. And actually, that was really cool. And actually, that meant something to me. And, that was really nice. Like, we change the way we think about it, and therefore approach it, right?
Yeah, well, it kicks into the fight-flight response. So if you're feeling socially isolated, you kick into the fight-flight. So you've got a big dose of cortisol, which makes you hyper-aware, but it also makes you wary of strangers. So if you're wary of strangers and they approach you, you're more likely to take a step back.
Yeah.
Whereas it's overcoming that fight-flight response. It's actually, when you're isolated, it's far worse. When someone's lonely and you ask them if they're okay, they're in a defensive mode, and they're going to say, well, yeah, I'm fine, and leave me alone. What do you want? There's a danger that comes with approaching people then. So that's why you've got to ask, and you've got to keep asking, because people that are lonely find it really hard to connect, and they're really defensive. So it's asking again. And sometimes it's about being vulnerable and say, hey, I've been in a position like that. This is what happened to me. Maybe you're in that position now. Can we talk about it? It's taking that sort of approach.
I think one of the obstacles that we face these days is how often we are on our phones, right? Like, the last time I was on a train was probably back when I lived in London and I was on the tube, and every single person on that train was staring at their cell phone, watching a video, listening to a podcast, texting someone, doing something. Like, there was very little interaction when I think back to that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's a default. That's the easy option. If you're in a waiting room and you don't want to approach someone because they might reject you, well, what's the simple thing to do? You don't want to make eye contact. Well, you pick up your phone, and it's a way to fill in time, but it's actually creating a wall. If someone's on their phone, they're concentrating on something, you don't want to approach them. And if you're on your phone and everyone's on their phone these days, it's so much harder. And just putting your phone down and seeing someone, if they look up for a moment, just having a word with them and saying a single thing, just saying, hi, how are you? And I've found, even since I've been doing this work, I'm much more forward in just talking to people and just taking a moment, making a comment, smile, having a smile. And it makes my whole day happier if I might have those little connections, those little interactions with people. It certainly adds a sparkle.
That reminds me of one time you and I met, and we were doing a bit of work on our talks for the Tell Me Tauranga event, and we met in the base station with Bev, who was like coaching us. And we were there basically to practice, right? And Bev's like, who's going to go first? Like, and I was like, I'll go, what have you. And I remember you saying, hey, like, tell me first, how was your weekend? What did you get up to? And it was so fascinating to me, because I was like, yeah, like, we just went straight to business. And I was like, yeah, like, it's nice to connect and actually, chat about things. And yeah, that stands out to me, because I was like, that was really nice. And I liked that you did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's connection first.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I talk about it at school too. When I'm talking with principals and groups of leaders in schools, it's connection before curriculum. It's actually taking the time to get to know someone, to put them at ease. It's that feeling of trust. When you're in a high trust environment, when people actually care about you, then you're safe, and then you can go and express yourself and feel much more comfortable doing that. I think Google ran a survey, and their number one factor in high performing teams, I can't remember the word they used for it, but it was about trust and about feeling like you're okay and no one's going to threaten you. And to be in that position. And the Middle East is a fantastic example of that, because before anything happens, they sit down, you get coffee, you get dates, and you sit and you have a chat about your life and what's going on before any business happens. And it doesn't matter if there's 3 or 4 different people in the room, they all get a coffee and they get dates, and that's what you talk about, and that's what happens before the business starts. And I think that's hugely important. I think that's something that in a Western culture we've very much forgotten about. But just touching base, just taking the time, just to see how people are, to talk about them outside of work. And it's been, I was in quite a high-powered Zoom meeting not so long ago, and I was kind of breaking the social questions, and someone else was hammering away on the business side of things. And it was really interesting just to see the contrast in the connections, but in where they were at.
Yeah.
I found it fascinating.
I also think that when we do that, when we take that time, and it doesn't have to take long, right? Like just a few minutes to actually connect on that level, it helps somebody else feel safe and seen. And like you said, it develops the trust. But when you did that day, I felt like it was like I kind of breathed out a little bit. I didn't realize I'd been holding my ear in, but I was like, right, got to get to business, got to do the work stuff. And when you did that, I was like, oh yeah, like it helped to kind of like remove an invisible wall, shall we say? Like it, yeah.
And even meeting times, if you're called into a meeting, just taking a moment to just connect with the people in the room first, and whether that means you get there at 5:02, or whether you just have a quick chat about something that's going on. Especially when you observe people, when you see people, and that might not be something to do in front of a group, but just if someone seems a bit uptight, if you see from their body language, from the way that they're approaching it, that hang on, something's not quite right here, or they've got something that they need to get off their chest, or it's important to touch base then too.
And I want to say, like, for our ADHD community, like, trust your instincts with that. I think, we've often doubted ourselves in that regard, but we do have really good instincts. We do see, hear, know things that other people don't. I've talked about that a lot on the podcast through our senses. So, that's an opportunity or an invitation to say, hey, like, is everything okay with you? What's going on? You seem a little tense. It's an invitation to connect.
That listening piece is probably the biggest piece about building trust. It's actually giving someone undivided attention. If you can sit and listen to one person for 1 minute, really listen to them and ask the second question, because I think that's in some ways the most important one, because it says, hey, I'm listening. This is what you said. Is this what that means? So you're actually really getting inside of their story, and they feel heard in that position too. But if you can listen to someone for 1 minute, the result of that, I think the trust that comes from that can last weeks, months, even years, because you've taken the time to truly listen to someone. And that's probably the greatest trust builder. And, you can go into different courses and stuff, and they say, oh, this is the body language you need to use, or you need to ask this question, or you need to do this. It's actually genuinely, if you're interested and take the time to show that interest, that's how you build authentic connection.
Yeah, definitely. And oh, my mind's gone completely blank. I had something so good. Ah, shit. I don't know. I had something really good. It's gone.
Maybe it'll come back.
It'll come back at a random time. It's perfect ADHD moment. You had something else that you were going to move to. What was that? I remember you saying.
I was going to talk about the way we make connections these days.
Yes.
So Robin Dunbar did a lot of work looking at how connections are made. And he basically came up with 7 pillars of connection. And the more of those that you hold in common, the more likely you are to form a relationship with that person. So his pillars were your profession, so your career and your education, your interests and your hobbies, your location, so where you live, where you're from more particularly, and your language. So language, not more so than just speaking the same language like English, it's the area that you come from. If my sister lives in Southland, she speaks English a little bit different than I do. If someone from the other side of town, from the other side of the railway tracks, from a different socioeconomic group, will speak differently than I do. So language to that extent. It's also your attitude, so your values and your worldview. It's R stands for rhythm, which is music. So musical tastes have a big impact, and often that's to do with your age. I think musical tastes are really quite closely tacked in with age, and your sense of humour is your other one. So if you meet someone and you've got 5 of those things in common, well, there's a good chance that you're going to get on with them and be friends. If you've got one of those in common, maybe not. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking in today's society, we're bumping into people that share less and less of those in common. Often we're far more transient than we used to be. If I ask people in a room in Tauranga to put their hands up and said, well, who's born in Tauranga? Maybe 1/5 or an eighth of the people in that room were born in Tauranga. I think the way we do things, I don't have to leave my home these days. I can get my groceries, my whiteware, my box, just about anything else I want, my shopping, my shoes can get delivered right here to my door. We don't meet in marketplaces like we used to. Even in Italy, we were there a few years ago, and all of the locals would go out and they go to the markets and they get their slices of ham and they get their cheeses and they get their vegetables and even some clothes and things in a marketplace. Whereas we don't have those marketplaces in common now. We might go to a big strip mall or the big shopping complex and go and get a couple of things, but very rarely. Even at a grocery shop, at a supermarket, you won't necessarily see a teller at the checkout. You can go through the self-checkout these days. And we get our news and our music online and our entertainment. So I watch Netflix and Amazon. I don't watch broadcast TV. If I'm looking for news, I'll look on an app. I get my music online as well. I don't listen to the radio anymore. So we haven't got those things in common that we used to. Many years ago, you used to be able to meet someone over a coffee and say, hey, did you see such and such on Channel 2 last night? Did you see the 60-minute special on the weekend? And everyone would have watched the 60-minute special, and we'd have that in common, and your discussions would go from there. But we don't share that in common anymore. And even COVID has polarized people, particularly lower socioeconomic groups and different racial groups felt marginalized because of COVID, which polarizes us. And so now, if you're trying to connect through those things that you have in common, you're actually connecting with a very select bunch of people. So here, and you have the same conversations in the same place with the same people. And there's the whole rest of the experience that you're missing out on. There's a whole world with different cultures and different people and different attitudes that we're starting to miss out on because of the way that we're connecting. If we were able to connect to those people and connect loosely to a whole range of people, then we're seeing far more of the world. Otherwise we're in little groups, little echo chambers, and we start to think everyone thinks like we do.
That reminds me of that saying, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah. And I reckon the way to connect with those people that you haven't got so much in common with is to ask them for their story, to ask them what's brought, particularly if you're in a room full of people, it's what's brought you to be in this room at this time today. And it's telling the story of what's brought them here. What is the story? What was something that they've needed to overcome? What is the objective? Why are they here? What's brought them here? And when you start to talk about stories, they're relatable.
Yeah.
Everyone has got a story. And there's things that go on in stories. Stories release the hormones, the oxytocins, the dopamines, the serotonins. When you're telling a story and people engage in a story, you get those hormones, it brings emotion, you come into synchrony. And the other side of that is a memory thing. And that relates to mentalizing. When you listen to a story, it's far more memorable than if you're just listening to facts. If I was to say, picture a man walking a horse, you might have a picture in your mind.
Yep.
If I was to say, picture a cowboy walking a horse, leading a horse, that's more memorable. If I said, picture Kevin Costner leading a horse, then that's an even sharper image, and that's much more memorable. If I was to ask you in 10 minutes time, and if we'd only done one of those, but it's far more memorable if you picture Kevin Costner walking a horse. And it's actually...
I actually think I could remember that.
Yeah. People doing memory challenges use similar techniques to that to remember long lists of numbers, to remember all sorts of things. It's the same as memory palaces. So if I wanted to remember a string of 6 numbers, okay, so what they do is they take every number between 0 and 100, and they'll assign a memory to that. A person doing a thing to an object. So number 10. So Nadia Comaneci got perfect 10s in gymnastics. So I'll picture Nadia Comaneci somersaulting off the high bars. So if I say 11, I picture Jonah Lomu running over an English rugby player. So he's number 11, Jonah Lomu running over. And if I say 99, do you know Get Smart, Agent 99?
No.
So, okay. Well, that's the picture that works for me. Agent 99 holding a gun at Maxwell Smart.
See, right? For me, I could go 99. Like, I grew up on 99 Warner Road. Like, I remember like my house in the letterbox, right? So I'm picturing something that I remember.
Think about the house. Maybe picture the house. So usually it's a person. Okay, a person, or maybe the house. I don't know, what can a house do? It's a person. Usually a person doing a thing to an object. So 99 to someone else. So if I put those numbers together, so if I went 10, 11, 99, I used the first, the second, and third. So I used Jonah Lomu. 10 was Nadia Comaneci. Running over 99, Maxwell Smart. So I used the person, the object, the thing in that order. So that's 6 digits I'm able to remember from one image.
From Nadia the story you picture in your head. Yeah.
From each of those ones. And it's the similar thing with my daughter trying to learn the times tables. So she struggled. We were rote learning. We're trying to get her to learn the timetables, and it just wasn't how her brain worked. She just didn't get it. This was when she was 7 or 8 or 9, and it was doing my head in because it just wasn't working. And I came across these cards, and one of them had a story on it. So there was a giant, a very friendly giant, and he was friendly, but everyone was scared of him and ran away. And one day he was looking for friendships. He went into a city, and people on the city streets were running everywhere and screaming and throwing their hands in the air. And the poor giant felt lonely, but he saw some workmen putting up a sign on a corner. So he went, and they were very focused on what they were doing, so they didn't see him. So he walked right up behind them and said, "Hello." And they were so frightened, they threw their hands in the air and they ran away. And the sign fell over and hit him on the shoe. Oh, it was so painful. He hobbled along holding his foot because it was aching. Now, the thing to remember from that story is shoe times sign equals aching. 2 times 9 equals 18. So it rhymes, but she just has a little image, and there's an image on those cards of a giant with a sign hitting his shoe, and he's holding his shoe, bouncing up and down, saying, "Oh, oh, oh." And that she could remember.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me, because as soon as you talk about stories, like, yes, stories, we use stories to connect, but the stories help us remember. Like when I'm, with a client or I'm meeting somebody new, like it's the story I remember. Like I remember bits that they've told me because of the story that they have wrapped around it. So again, using that to remember information.
Yeah. So Matt Lieberman, they ran experiments and they looked at what they call it the social encoding advantage. And they looked at, and again, when people are remembering story, they use the mentalizing part of their brain, which is a different part of the brain than they use for rote learning. And it's more powerful at remembering certain things than your standard rote learning brain. That's why story is so powerful. If you're teaching history, rather than trying to teach people dates, teach them the stories of things that happened in history. Bring the character to life, and then it makes sense. The same with English. When you're telling stories, if you're able to remember things through story, I think they're so much more memorable. And that really stands out to me because my background is in story, is in writing kids' novels.
I'm thinking of one of my clients. She's in America, in Texas, and she teaches Spanish. And she has, like, the highest rate of, I think, success in her class in the school because she teaches her kids through story.
Yeah.
Right. So she has a lot of kids who have, various forms of neurodiversity, but what she's doing is she's teaching them through story. And that way they're able to visually picture things and remember things and connect those dots.
Yep.
It's just
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah, it's the memory side of things, it's the social encoding, and it's the emotion, because when it moves us, that becomes more memorable as well. And tie those two together, and I think that's a great recipe. And again, I think it comes right back to prehistory, before we could read and write. How do we remember things? Our brains developed along with stories, when we needed to remember where the bushes were, where we found the great berries at this time of the season. They started to code in stories, and a lot of mythology, a lot of information relates. The way that we remember it really relates to stories about, and geography, and finding things, and putting those things together. Part of it's mapping, but part of it's just a great way to remember. Even the sagas, the rhyme, and the way that people remember, because they all came from oral memory. People could recite stuff for a day, half a day, end for end, to retain that knowledge. Otherwise, without writing, it became lost.
I love the question that you offered, which is, what brought you here?
Yeah.
I think that that's such a powerful question that we can ask for connection. But right away, like, one of the ways, people with ADHD, one of the ways that we connect with others is we will share something that demonstrates we can relate and we can empathize. So when we ask that question and we get to know and understand somebody else, then we can say, oh, wow, like, I've had this experience. Is this what you mean? Like, we'll often share a similar experience as a form of kind of connection, and showing that we can relate to you and we understand where you're coming from. So I think that's an amazing question.
Yeah. And I went to a conference, and there was a workshop being run, and that was one of the questions, and we ended up pairing up, and I ended up paired up with this woman, and she told me a story about how she came from a very big family, 9 kids, and they were constantly moving because they couldn't find a house big enough to rent. It was like lodges and things that were for sale. So they were always moving when she was younger, and she had a really hard time relating to people and making friendships because she was always moving all the time. And just having told that story and listened to it, it was every time I saw her for the rest of the conference, I'd make a point of just saying hi. And because I felt like I knew her so much better, and it explained a lot about her and about who she was. And it certainly, it made me feel much more empathy to her all the time. And that was the connection that built because of that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. I love that. Tell me, is there anything that we have missed? I feel like we've covered so many things. Is there anything that we have missed that you want to make sure that we talk about?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. We've done pretty well at covering all of the ground.
We've covered so much. I love it. Thank you so much, Vince. Tell me, tell our listeners, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Just look up vinceford.org. It's got my email and my phone number. I love to hear from people. I've been doing some public speaking around the country, mainly in schools and with educational institutes, but also particularly interested in speaking for like men's mental health and areas like that, where people with a greater understanding of connection. I think when we connect further, it has a huge impact on loneliness, but also on physical health. And I didn't get into that at all today, but social connection is or if you're socially disconnected, it's as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's a huge impact on your health. So if there are opportunities to speak to groups and even to businesses, I'm more than happy to. And I'm even looking at running some workshops around story as well. Something I'm passionate about.
Good. I'll be signing up. I love it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Vince. I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us today.
That's great. I've really enjoyed it.
If you are loving what you're learning here on the podcast, but you still feel like your ADHD is holding you back, I can help. Using evidence-based coaching tools and my own experiences, I'll help you to manage your emotions and feel better. to increase your productivity, grow your self-confidence, and create the life that you were meant for. Visit zenajones.com/thrive and schedule an ADHD support session to get started.